In the year 2951 of the Third Age, when the shadow of Dol Guldur yet lingered upon the borders of Mirkwood, there came a night unlike any other in the memory of the Eldar. The stars themselves seemed to weep, falling from the heavens in streams of silver fire. And in the Vale of Rivendell, where the House of Elrond stood as a beacon against the gathering darkness, a child was born beneath this celestial weep. The midwife, an elf maiden named Erestor's daughter, spoke in hushed tones of the strange circumstances. As the first cry pierced the night air, the falling stars ceased their descent. Yet where they had touched the earth, the grass withered black, as though touched by flame. The child's mother, a wanderer from the south who had sought sanctuary in the last homely house, breathed her last with words that chilled the hearts of all who heard them. He shall walk between light and shadow, and in the end, choose the fate of both. Yes, Lord Elrond himself came forth from his chamber, drawn by portents he could not name. Upon gazing at the babe, his eyes widened with an ancient fear, for though the child appeared fair as any of the race of men, about him clung shadows that moved independently of any light, and his eyes, those eyes held depths that seemed older than the stones of Rivendell itself. "What name shall he bear?" asked Glorfindel, who had stood vigil through the night. Elrond pondered long before answering, his gaze never leaving the child. "He shall be called Morwen, for he is born of shadow and light entwined. Yet I fear the time will come when Middle-earth shall know him by another name entirely." And so it was that Morwen was raised in the hidden valley, though never did the shadow that clung to him fade, nor did the elves speak openly of the withered ground where the stars had fallen on the night of his birth. 17 years passed in Rivendell, and Morwen grew tall and strong, possessed of a keen mind and noble bearing that reminded all who looked upon him of the great kings of old. Yet for all his fair seeming, he remained apart from others, for where he walked, flowers would sometimes wither without cause, and animals fled his presence as though sensing some doom about him. Elrond had taken the youth under his personal tutelage, teaching him the lore of ages past and the tongues of many people. In the great library of Rivendell, among scrolls that held the wisdom of the elder days, Morwen learned of the Silmaril and the wars of old, of the fall of Numenor and the deeds of Gil-galad. Yet always there were texts that Elrond would not permit him to read, ancient tomes bound in black leather that seemed to whisper when Morwen drew near. "Master," Morwen asked one gray morning as they walked beside the Bruinen, "why do you forbid me these writings? What knowledge do they contain that you deem too perilous for my learning?" Elrond's face grew grave, and for a long moment he spoke not at all. The river sang its eternal song, and the leaves of autumn drifted upon its waters like memories of summer past. "There are powers in this world, my son," Elrond said at last, using the term of endearment, though Morwen was not of his blood, "that are better left undisturbed. Some knowledge bears too heavy a price, and some doors, once opened, can never again be closed." But Morwen was young, and youth ever chafes at boundary. That very night, as the house of Elrond lay in slumber, he crept into the library and laid hands upon the forbidden tome that had called to him most strongly. The moment his fingers touched the ancient binding, the shadows about him deepened, and the whispers grew loud enough that he could discern words in a tongue that was old when Numenor was young. Within the pages, illuminated in silver ink that seemed to move and writhe, he read of the Nazgul and their making, of the corruption of kings, and the promise of power beyond mortal ken. But more than this, he read of a prophecy set down in the elder days by Elrond's own brother Elros that spoke of one who would be born when the stars fell like tears. "In the latter days of the Third Age, when the shadow grows long upon the earth, shall come forth one born of starfall and sorrow, neither wholly of the light nor claimed by darkness. He shall hold the power to heal the wounds of the world, or to make them eternal. By his choice shall the fate of Middle-earth be decided, for in him shall be gathered the essence of all who came before." The book fell from Morwen's trembling hands, and as it struck the floor, a sound like thunder rolled through the valley. though the night was clear. Dawn found Morwen standing still as stone beside the river, the forbidden tome clutched against his chest. Elrond approached with measured steps, his face bearing a sorrow that seemed to age him beyond his immortal years. "So," the Lord of Rivendell said softly, "the hour has come at last. I had hoped for more time." "You knew," Morwen said, "and it was not a question. You have always known what I am. I knew that your birth was marked by portents. I knew that the blood of many lines flows within your vein, some noble, some otherwise, but what you shall choose to become remains unwritten." Elrond placed a gentle hand upon the young man's shoulder. "That is why I sought to shelter you, to give you time to grow strong in wisdom before the world would claim you." A sound of hoofbeats echoed from the paths leading to Rivendell, and both turned to see a rider approaching at great speed. The horse bore the livery of Gondor, and the man upon its back swayed with exhaustion. The messenger fell to his knees before them, gasping out his urgent tiding. "My lords, I bear word from Denethor, ruling steward of Gondor. Dark tidings have come from the south and east. Mordor stirs, and shadows move in the night. The steward has heard tell of one dwelling in Rivendell who bears the bloodline of kings and the mark of power. He summons this one to Minas Tirith with all haste, for the need is dire." Elrond's eyes met Morwen's, and in that exchange passed understanding that needed no words. The time of hiding was ended. "Tell your master," Elrond said to the messenger, "that Morwen, son of the stars, shall ride forth within the week. But warn him well, he summons more than he knows, and the consequences of this summoning may reach far beyond his intentions." As the messenger departed to bear these words back to the White City, Morwen felt the shadows about him stir with anticipation, and from the depths of his being came a whisper in a voice not his own. "At last." The game begins anew. 7 days later, as the first frost touched the leaves of Rivendell, Morwen departed the last homely house. He rode alone, for Elrond had deemed it wise that none of the household accompany him on this journey. At his side hung a blade forged in the elder days, its name Gurthang, the Iron of Death, though this name was known only to Elrond and was spoken to none. The road south was long and filled with perils both seen and unseen. Through the Trollshaws he passed, where ancient stones bore carvings in scripts that hurt the eyes to read, and across the misty mountains by way of the Redhorn Pass, where the wind howled with voices of the long dead. At night, when he made camp in the wild places, Morwen found that his sleep was filled with dreams that seemed more memory than vision. He saw great cities of white stone crumbling beneath armies of shadow, heard the clash of blade on blade in battles fought before the sun was made, and always, threading through these scenes of war and ruin, came the voice that was not his own, growing stronger with each passing league. "Do you see, young king? Do you see the futility of their struggles? All their great works come to naught in the end. Only the darkness endures, for it is the natural state of all things." By day, as he rode through the Gap of Rohan and looked upon the great grasslands where the horse lords dwelt, Morwen fought against these whispers. He thought of Elrond's teachings, of the beauty he had known in Rivendell, of the light in the eyes of those who strove against despair. Yet, with each sunset, the voice grew harder to resist. It was on the plains of Anorion, within sight of the towers of Minas Tirith, that he encountered the first sign that his coming had been marked by more than mortal eyes. A host of Nazgul wheeled overhead, their fell cries echoing across the grassland. Yet they did not descend to attack. Instead, they circled thrice about him, and from their leader came words that chilled his blood. "Hail, Morwen Starborn, heir to thrones beyond counting. The Master awaits your decision. Choose wisely, for this choice you make shall echo through all the days of the world." Aye, then they were gone, leaving only the stench of corruption and the echo of ancient malice. Morwen's horse trembled beneath him, and for the first time since leaving Rivendell, he felt the full weight of his destiny pressing down upon him like a mountain. The gates of Minas Tirith opened before Morwen as he rode up the winding ways of the city, and he marveled at the white towers, that caught the light of the setting sun. Yet even here, in this greatest stronghold of men, he could feel the creeping touch of despair that had begun to take root in the hearts of its defenders. Denethor, ruling steward of Gondor, received him in the citadel with great ceremony, though Morwen marked how the man's eyes lingered overlong upon the shadows that followed in his wake. The steward was tall and proud, bearing the blood of Numenor in his noble features, yet there was a hardness about him that spoke of burdens too long borne. So, Denethor said, when they were alone in his private chambers, "You are the one of whom the old tales. I had thought such lore to be mere legend, yet the Seeing Stone does not lie." He gestured toward a covered object that sat upon a pedestal, and Morwen felt an immediate revulsion, as though something loathsome crouched beneath the black cloth. "What would you have of me, Lord Steward?" Morwen asked, though he feared he already knew the answer. "War comes," Denethor replied bluntly. "The Dark Lord masses his forces in Mordor, and our scouts report movements in the south and east that speak of alliances formed in shadow. Gondor has stood against the darkness for nigh on 1,000 years, but our strength wanes while that of our enemies grows. We have need of every weapon we can wield. I am no weapon to be wielded by any man's will," Morwen said, and as he spoke, the shadows in the chamber seemed to deepen. Denethor's eyes glittered with a light that was not entirely sane. "Are you not? Tell me, young lord, what do you know of your true parentage? Has the wise Elrond told you the full tale of your begetting?" A chill ran through Morwen's heart, for he realized that Denethor knew more than he was revealing. "Speak plainly, if you would have me understand your meaning." "Your mother was indeed a wanderer from the south," Denethor said, rising to pace before the great window that looked out over the Pelennor fields. "But she was more than this. She was the last daughter of the line of the Mouth of Sauron, keeper of the Dark Tower's secrets, and her blood carried the essence of the 9 kings who became the Nazgul. Yet she fled her heritage, seeking redemption in the north." He turned to face Morwen with burning eyes. "And your father. Ah, there lies the greatest secret of all." "My father?" Morwen whispered, though he dreaded the answer. "The necromancer of Dol Guldur," Denethor said with cruel satisfaction. "Sauron himself, in the guise he wore during his years of hiding. You are the child of ultimate darkness and the last light of the faithful, the living embodiment of the war that tears at the heart of Middle-earth." The revelation struck Morwen like a physical blow, and the shadows about him writhed and twisted, as though in celebration. From the depths of his being came laughter that was not his own, terrible and triumphant. For 3 days Morwen dwelt in Minas Tirith, as one stricken by a mortal wound, speaking to none and taking neither food nor drink. The knowledge of his parentage burned within him like a poison, and with each hour that passed, the voice that was not his own grew stronger, more persuasive in its whispers of power and dominion. "Now you understand," it crooned in the darkness of his chamber. "You are my son, my heir, the vessel I have prepared for this hour. Through you shall I complete what was begun in the elder days. Through you shall all the peoples of Middle-earth bow before the Lord of the Rings." On the 4th day, Denethor came to him bearing the covered palantir, and Morwen knew that the hour of testing had arrived. "Look into the Seeing Stone," the steward commanded, his voice harsh with desperation. "See the truth of what approaches. See how our enemies mass for the final assault upon all that is fair and free in this world. Surely even one of your heritage must choose to stand with the light against such darkness." With hands that trembled despite his will, Morwen pulled away the black cloth and gazed into the crystal sphere. Immediately his vision was filled with images of terrible clarity. Vast armies marching beneath banners of black and red, the towers of Barad-dûr rising like a wound in the sky, and most terrible of all, the flaming eye of Sauron turning its gaze upon him across the league. "My son," came the voice of the Dark Lord, no longer a whisper, but a command that shook the very foundations of the citadel. "The time has come for you to take your place at my side. Too long have you dwelt among those who would deny your birthright. Come to me, and together we shall rule over all the lands of Middle-earth." For a moment that stretched into eternity, Morwen felt the terrible temptation of that offer. He saw himself seated upon a throne of black iron, with all the kings and princes of the world kneeling before him. He saw an end to war and strife, for who would dare stand against the combined might of father and son? But then, through the visions of dominion and power, came another voice, softer, but carrying within it all the strength of starlight upon dark water. It was the voice of his mother, calling to him across the void of death. "Remember who you choose to be, my son. Remember that the greatest power is the power to choose love over fear, hope over despair. You are more than the sum of your blood. You are what you make yourself." The palantir cracked in his hands, sending spiderwebs of silver light racing across its surface, and with a cry that shattered every window in the citadel, Morwen cast it from him. The stone struck the floor and burst into 1,000 fragments, each one reflecting not the present moment, but glimpses of possible futures, some bright, some dark, all hanging upon the choices yet to be made. Denethor stared at the ruined seeing stone with eyes wide with horror. "What have you done?" That stone was the last link between Gondor and its ancient wisdom. "I have chosen," Morwen said, rising to his feet with new resolve burning in his heart. "But not the choice you hoped for, nor the one my father demands. I choose a third path, one that neither light nor darkness has foreseen." Word of the broken palantir spread swiftly through the lower circles of Minas Tirith, and with it came whispers of the stranger who had come bearing shadows in his wake. Some spoke of him as a harbinger of doom, others as a weapon forged for the final battle against Mordor. None spoke the truth, for the truth was too terrible for mortal minds to comprehend. In the houses of healing, where the wise women tended to those wounded in body and spirit, an ancient crone named Ioreth spoke in hushed tones to her apprentices. "I have lived through 90 summers, and in all that time I have never felt such a disturbance in the fabric of things. The very air trembles with possibilities unborn, and the stones of the city whisper of changes that shall shake the foundations of the world." Seats. Meanwhile, in the depths of the citadel, Morwen walked alone through corridors that had not seen light for centuries, drawn by an instinct he could not name toward secrets that lay buried beneath the White City. Here, in chambers that predated the founding of Gondor itself, he found carvings that spoke of the first war between light and shadow, when the Valar themselves took the field against Melkor the enemy. Among these ancient reliefs, wrought by hands now dust for uncounted years, he discovered one that made his heart stop with recognition. It showed a figure standing between two great armies, neither of light nor shadow, but something altogether different, a being that held within itself the power to heal or destroy, to preserve or to transform. Below this image, in script so old that few now living could read it, were carved the words that Elrond had forbidden him to learn. "When starfall marks the birth of one who is both ending and beginning, the song of the world shall be sung anew. In his hands lies the power to break the cycle of the ages, to forge a path where none has walked before." As Morwen studied these carvings, feeling the weight of prophecy settling upon his shoulders like a mantle of lead, a shadow fell across the threshold behind him. He turned to find a figure robed in gray, leaning upon a staff of white wood, his eyes twinkling with starlight and ancient mirth. "Gandalf," Morwen breathed, for though he had never met the wizard, the tales of Rivendell had made his face familiar. "Indeed," the Grey Pilgrim replied, stepping into the chamber with the careful tread of one who walks in holy places. "Though I think perhaps we should speak rather of why you have sought out this particular corner of Minas Tirith's secret. Few would think to look for the Chamber of Beginnings, save those whose fate is written in its stones." "You know what I am," Morwen said, and again, it was not a question. Gandalf studied him for a long moment, his piercing gaze seeming to look through flesh and bone to the very core of his being. I know what you were born to be. I know what your father intended you to become. But what interests me far more is what you choose to make of yourself, despite the weight of blood and prophecy that would shape your path. Then you know why I am here, in this place of ancient making? I suspect, Gandalf said with a smile that held both sorrow and hope, that you seek the same thing I have sought for many long years, a way to break the endless cycle of war between light and shadow that has plagued Middle-earth since the music of the Ainur first shaped the world. But tell me, young one, are you prepared for the price such knowledge demands? Before Morwen could answer, the sound of horns rang out across the city, their voices crying alarm. From the Pelennor fields came the thunder of hoofbeats and the clash of arms, and both wizard and youth knew that the time for preparation had passed. The war for Middle-earth had begun. The assault upon Minas Tirith came with the rising of the sun, though no light could penetrate the pall of smoke and shadow that rolled across the Pelennor field. From the gates of Mordor had issued forth an army the like of which had not been seen since the last alliance. Orcs beyond counting, trolls from the northern wastes, and creatures of such fell design that even the bravest defenders turned their faces away rather than look upon them. Yet it was not the mere number of enemies that struck terror into the hearts of Gondor's defenders, but the presence that rode at their head. Upon a fell beast, whose wings blotted out the sky, sat the Witch King of Angmar, first and mightiest of the nine, and beside him rode his 8 companions in darkness. But most terrible of all was the figure that walked among the host on foot, cloaked in shadow and flame, whose very presence caused the earth to crack and wither beneath his feet. Sauron himself comes forth from Barad-dûr, Gandalf said as he and Morwen stood upon the ramparts of the city, watching the black tide roll toward them. In all the long years of his rebellion, never has he risked his presence upon a field of battle. He comes for you, Morwen. He comes to claim his son and complete the dominion that has been his goal since the world was young. Below them, the defenders of Minas Tirith prepared for what many believed would be their final battle. Prince Imrahil of Dol Amroth marshaled the Knights of the Swan, their white banners a defiant brightness against the encroaching gloom. The guard of the Fountain Court stood ready at the gates, their faces grim but resolute. From Rohan had come Éomer and his riders, though they numbered far fewer than hope had demanded. "Will you take the field?" Gandalf asked, his eyes never leaving the approaching host. Morwen felt the shadows about him writhe with anticipation, and from the depths of his being came the voice of his father, more compelling than ever before. "Come to me, my son. Take your place at my side, and this slaughter need not continue. Together we shall rule in peace, and no more blood need be shed." Yet even as the Dark Lord's words echoed in his mind, Morwen heard another voice, the memory of his mother's final blessing, the wisdom of Elrond's teaching, the hope that still flickered in the hearts of those who chose to stand against despair despite all odds. "I will take the field," he said at last, his hand moving to the hilt of Gurthang, "but not as my father's son, nor as the weapon Denethor would wield. I go as myself, to forge a path that neither light nor darkness has foreseen." The gates of Minas Tirith opened with a sound like thunder, and Morwen rode forth upon a horse black as midnight, his blade naked in his hand, and the shadows streaming behind him like a banner of war. Yet these were not the shadows of corruption and despair, but something altogether different, the darkness that comes before dawn, pregnant with the promise of change. The armies met with a crash that shook the very pillars of the earth, and in the midst of that chaos, father and son came face to face at last. In the heart of the battle, where the grass of the Pelennor was trampled to mud beneath the feet of armies, a circle of silence fell as Sauron the Dark Lord approached his son. The very air trembled with the weight of power barely contained, and all who fought nearby felt the oppressive presence that spoke of dominion and despair. The Dark Lord stood nearly twice the height of mortal men, his form wreathed in shadow and flame, his armor black as the void between stars. Yet for all his terrible majesty, it was his eyes that held the greatest menace, burning pits of malice that had witnessed the making of the world and sought now to unmake it. "My son," Sauron spoke, and his voice was the sound of mountains falling, of cities crumbling to dust. "Behold what your defiance has wrought. See how the blood of the innocent flows like water upon the ground. All of this could cease with but a word from you. Kneel and acknowledge me as your Father and Lord, and I shall spare these lands the fire that awaits them." Morwen stood before this terrible presence without flinching, though every instinct screamed at him to flee or bow. Around them, the battle raged on, but it seemed distant and unreal, as though they stood apart from the world in a place where only truth could be spoken. "I am your son by blood," Morwen replied, his voice carrying clearly despite the chaos that surrounded them. "But I am not your creature. The power that flows in my veins is mine to command, not yours." Sauron's laughter was the sound of breaking glass, of hopes crushed beneath the weight of reality. "Foolish child, do you think the few years you spent among the Eldar could wash away the corruption that is your birthright? You are darkness incarnate, the vessel I prepared for this very hour. Fighting against your nature will only bring you pain." As if to prove his words, the Dark Lord raised his hand, and immediately Morwen felt the shadows within him respond, writhing and clawing at his mind like living thing. The voice that was not his own rose to a roar, demanding submission, promising ease if only he would cease his futile resistance. Yet, in that moment of greatest trial, Morwen reached not for the light that Elrond had tried to kindle within him, nor for the darkness that his father sought to command, but for something else entirely, the space between, the place where all possibilities dwelt in perfect balance. "You are wrong, Father," he said, and to the astonishment of all who witnessed, his voice grew stronger rather than weaker under the assault of the Dark Lord's will. "I am not darkness incarnate, nor am I some champion of the light. I am change itself, the breaking of the cycle that has held this world in thrall since the beginning of days." With that declaration, Morwen raised Gurthang high above his head, and the blade burst into flame. Not the red fire of destruction, but a silver radiance that seemed to sing with the voices of the Ainur themselves. This was not the light of Valinor, nor the shadow of Mordor, but something altogether new, the flame of transformation, burning away all that was old and making space for what was yet to be born. The flame that danced along Gurthang's edge spread outward from the blade, not consuming but transforming all it touched. Where the silver fire fell upon the corrupted orcs of Mordor's host, they did not perish but changed, their twisted forms straightening into something that might once have been beautiful. The fell beasts of the Nazgul cried out in voices that held wonder rather than malice, as though waking from a nightmare that had lasted for ages of the world. Sauron himself staggered back from this radiance, his form wavering like smoke in a strong wind. For the first time since his rebellion in the music of the Ainur, the Dark Lord felt something he had thought buried beyond recovery. Uncertainty. "What sorcery is this?" he demanded, his voice no longer the confident roar of absolute power, but the question of one who finds the world suddenly strange and unfamiliar. "Not sorcery," Morwen replied, advancing with the silver flame spreading ever wider from his blade. "Truth. The truth that you have spent ages trying to deny, that light and shadow are not enemies but partners in the great dance of creation. You sought to break the music by introducing discord, but discord too has its place in the greater harmony. Around them, the very nature of the battle was changing. Men and orcs found themselves fighting side by side against common foes, not because of any magic compulsion, but because the artificial divisions that had been imposed upon the world were crumbling like walls built upon sand. The Nazgul, freed from the binding of their ring, stood revealed as the kings they had once been, their nobility restored, though scarred by long servitude to darkness. "This cannot be," Sauron whispered, his form growing ever more insubstantial as the flame of transformation spread. "The discord I have sown has taken root too deeply. The hatred between the peoples of Middle-earth runs too deep to be healed by any power. Perhaps, Morwen acknowledged, never ceasing his advance. But that is for them to choose, not for us to impose. The age of the Valar shaping the world according to their design is ending, Father. The age of the children of Ilúvatar making their own choices begins. The Dark Lord raised the hand that bore the One Ring, and for a moment the silver flame flickered and dimmed. Yet it did not die, for it was not powered by any external source, but by the will of one who had chosen to step outside the ancient patterns of dominion and submission. "You would destroy everything," Sauron said, his voice carrying a note of something that might almost have been desperation. Order, purpose, the very structures that hold reality together. All of it would crumble into chaos, without the guidance of those with the wisdom to rule. "Perhaps," Morwen said again, raising Gurthang until its point rested against his father's chest, where a heart might have been, had love not long since been burned away. "But that chaos would be honest, at least, and from it something new might grow, something neither of us can imagine or control." As the silver flame from Gurthang touched the Dark Lord's form, Sauron's body began to dissolve like mist before the morning sun. Yet rather than the shriek of agony that all expected, from the fading shadow came a sound that none who heard it would ever forget, a sigh of release, as though a burden carried for untold ages was finally being set aside. "Son," the Dark Lord whispered with his final breath, as a physical being, "I had not thought to find peace in defeat. Perhaps you are wiser than your father." The ring of power, bereft of its master's will to sustain it, began to crack and splinter upon Sauron's fading hand. Yet instead of simply dissolving into nothingness, the gold of its making flowed like liquid fire toward Morwen, merging with the silver flame that surrounded him, until he bore about his brow a circlet that was neither the One Ring nor any artifact of dominion, but something entirely new, a crown that bound nothing and commanded none, but offered instead the choice to be free. Across all the battlefields of Middle-earth, the change rippled outward like stones cast into still water. In Isengard, the enslaved Uruk-hai looked upon their weapons with wonder and cast them aside, choosing to walk away from war toward an uncertain but self-determined future. In the dark places beneath the misty mountains, creatures that had hidden from light for centuries ventured forth to see the sun, no longer driven by hunger and hatred, but curious about the world above. The Nazgûl, their bonds broken and their true forms restored, knelt not in submission, but in gratitude before the son of their former master. Elrond, watching from afar through means known only to the wise, felt tears upon his cheeks as he witnessed the fulfillment of prophecies older than memory. Yet, with this great transformation came a price that Morwen had foreseen, but not spoken aloud. The silver flame that had remade so much of Middle-earth was consuming him from within, burning away not his life, but his very nature, as a being bound by the old rules of existence. He was becoming something unprecedented in the history of Arda. Not Vala, nor Maya, not elf, nor man, but a living bridge between what was and what might yet be. "The choice is made," he said to those who gathered around him as the battle's end became clear, his voice already growing distant, though he stood among them still. "The age of predetermined fate is ending. What comes next is yours to decide, all of you together." Gandalf approached through the crowd of transformed warriors. His staff no longer needed to channel power, but carried now as a mere walking stick. The wizard's eyes held a mixture of pride and sorrow as he looked upon the young man who had chosen to sacrifice his individual existence for the freedom of all. "Will you linger long among us?" Gandalf asked, though he already knew the answer. Morwen smiled, and in that expression was all the warmth of spring after the longest winter. "Long enough to see the first steps taken on the new path. Long enough to ensure that the choice I have made brings hope rather than chaos." He looked out over the Pelennor, where former enemies worked side by side to tend the wounded and build shelters for the night. the music of the world grows more complex, but perhaps that is as it should be. In the years that followed the day that came to be known as the Transformation, Middle-earth began to change in ways both subtle and profound. The rigid boundaries that had long divided the peoples, the walls between elf and man, the ancient enmity between the children of Aule and the firstborn of Iluvatar began to blur and soften as individuals made their own choices about where their loyalties lay. Morwen, though he had transcended his mortal form, did not vanish entirely from the world. Instead, he became something like a presence in the wind, a whisper in the turning of the season, appearing to those who stood at crossroads in their lives to offer counsel but never command. Some said he had become the voice of choice itself, the reminder that every moment held within it the possibility of change. The Shire, long isolated from the greater affairs of Middle-earth, opened its borders to travelers from all land. Hobbit holes sprouted gardens tended by reformed Uruk-hai, who had discovered in the growing of things a peace they had never known in war. In Rivendell, Elrond hosted a great council where representatives of all the free people, and some who had only recently become free, gathered to write new laws based not on the wisdom of ages past, but on the hope of what tomorrow might bring. The Nazgul, restored to their true names and forms, chose different paths for their remaining years. Some sought to make amends for the deeds done while under the Shadow's dominion. Others sailed west to beg forgiveness of the valor themselves. One, who had been the Witch King of Angmar, became a healer in the Houses of Healing in Minas Tirith, finding in the preservation of life a balance to the destruction he had once brought. Denethor, freed from the madness that the broken Palantir had brought upon him, worked to rebuild Gondor not as a fortress against darkness, but as a beacon of hope for all who sought a better way. The White City became a place where the former servants of Shadow could come to learn new ways of living, and its towers rang with songs in languages that had not been heard since the Elder Days. Yet perhaps the greatest change was in the very nature of choice itself. No longer were the paths of individuals bound by the weight of ancient prophecy or the decrees of distant power. The free will that Iluvatar had granted to his children at the world's making was at last truly free, unencumbered by the manipulations of those who would shape destiny to their own design. Gandalf, in his final report to the Valar before laying down his staff forever, wrote these words: "The child born under Shadow has fulfilled his purpose beyond all hope or expectation." The music of the Ainur continues, but now it includes harmonies that none of us foresaw, discordant at times, but honest in a way that our perfect symphony never was. Middle-earth grows toward something new, and though we cannot see where this path leads, I believe it leads toward hope. On a hill overlooking the Shire, where the light of sunset painted the fields in gold and crimson, a figure that might have been Morwen stood watching the children play. Children of many races learning together that differences need not mean division. As the stars began to shine in the darkening sky, he smiled and spoke words that the wind carried to every corner of Middle-earth. The song begins anew. Let all who have voices raise them in whatever harmony they choose. The music of the spheres grows richer for every voice that joins it, even, or especially, those that sing in keys we have never heard before. And so ended the age of predetermined fate, and began the age of chosen destinies, in which every being in Middle-earth became the author of their own story, for good or ill, in hope or despair, in wisdom or folly, but always, forever after, in freedom. Thus ends the tale of Morwen, the child born under Shadow, who chose to light a flame that neither consumed nor preserved, but transformed all it touched. May his choice echo through all the ages of the world, reminding us that even the darkest heritage need not determine our destiny if we have the courage to write our own.